I needed solitude. The pressure of work, life, everything, it was too much. I found a remote cabin deep in the forest, far from the noise of the city. The drive was long and winding, but the silence when I arrived was worth it. The first few days were peaceful. The forest was dense, a sea of green. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine. I spent my days hiking, exploring, and trying to clear my mind. It was exactly what I needed. On the third day, I noticed something strange. The forest was eerily quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, no animals, just silence. It was unsettling. I tried to ignore it, but the quiet pressed in on me. That night I couldn't sleep. The silence was too loud. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Then I heard it, a faint, distant hum. I sat up, listening. The hum grew louder, coming from the forest. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The air was cold, my breath fogged in front of me. The hum was steady, almost rhythmic. I followed it, my heart pounding. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing only trees and shadows. The hum led me deeper into the forest. I walked for what felt like hours. But then I saw it, a clearing up ahead. In the center was a large, ancient tree. Its bark was twisted, its branches gnarled. The hum was coming from the tree. I approached it cautiously. The air around it was different, heavy. I reached out and touched the bark. It was warm, pulsing with energy. Suddenly, the hum stopped. The silence returned, thicker than before. I felt a presence behind me. I turned slowly. There, in the shadows, stood a figure, tall, gaunt, with hollow eyes. It stared at me, unblinking. I backed away, my heart racing. The figure stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper. No response. It reached out a bony hand. I stumbled back, tripping over roots, falling to the ground. The figure loomed over me, its hollow eyes boring into mine. I scrambled to my feet and ran. Branches scratched my face, my legs, but I didn't stop. I ran until I burst out of the forest, collapsing on the ground near the cabin. I looked back, but the figure was gone. The hum was gone. Only silence remained. I packed my things and left the next morning. The forest was no longer peaceful. It was a place of shadows and silence and something ancient and malevolent. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw the figure standing at the edge of the trees, watching me leave. I never went back to that forest. The ocean always fascinated me, with its vastness and mystery. As an underwater archaeologist, I thrived on the thrill of discovery. This expedition was supposed to be my greatest yet, a sunken ship, lost to history, lying untouched on the ocean floor. My dive partner Daniel and I prepared our gear. The sea was calm, the sun a distant memory as we descended into the depths. The water grew colder, darker. Our lights cut through the murky blue, illuminating the ancient wreck below. As we reached the ship, we saw its haunting silhouette against the dark abyss. Its once grand structure now lay in ruin, encrusted with marine life. We swam closer, our movements slow and deliberate. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of our breathing and the occasional creak of the ship. We began our exploration, documenting the relics scattered around the shipwreck. I found an old compass, its needle still intact. Daniel swam ahead to explore another area, his light bobbing in the distance. I'm not sure what happened. My focus was on the relics, but suddenly, Daniel's light vanished.
Daniel?
I called through the comms. No response. Panic surged through me. I swam towards where I last saw him. Nothing. Only darkness and silence. I scanned the area, my light sweeping across the wreck. My breathing grew rapid, fogging my mask.
Daniel, answer me.
Still nothing. The crushing weight of the ocean pressed in, amplifying my fear. Then I heard it. A faint, disembodied voice. Michael. It was a whisper, barely audible over the sound of my own breath. I turned, but there was no one. Just the endless blue.
Who's there?
I shouted, my voice trembling. The voice returned, closer this time.
Michael, help us.
My heart pounded. I felt a cold chill despite the wetsuit. I knew it was impossible, yet the voice seemed so real. Desperate, I swam deeper into the wreck, searching for any sign of Daniel. As I navigated the twisted corridors, the voice grew louder, more insistent.
Michael, save us.
It echoed through the hollow chambers, bouncing off the rusted walls. My light flickered, casting eerie shadows. I reached the ship's hold, cavernous space filled with decaying crates and broken artifacts. There, in the corner, I saw him. Daniel, floating motionless, his eyes wide with terror. I rushed over to him, shaking his shoulder.
Daniel, wake up.
His eyes slowly focused on me.
The voices, they're everywhere,
he muttered, his voice weak.
We need to leave now.
I grabbed his arm, pulling him towards the exit. The voices intensified, a cacophony of pleas and whispers.
Save us, Michael. Join us, save us, join us, save us.
It was overwhelming, the noise filling my head. We swam as fast as we could, the weight of the ocean dragging us down. The ship seemed to come alive, its structure groaning and shifting. Debris fell around us, blocking our path. We were trapped. I found a narrow passage, barely wide enough for us to squeeze through.
Daniel, come on,
I urged. We forced our way through, the wreckage closing in behind us. The voices screamed in our ears, desperate and angry.
Save us, Michael. Join us, save us, save us, join us, save us, Michael. Join us.
Finally, we broke free through the hole torn in the hull of the ship. The open ocean, a welcome sight. We ascended safely, but as quickly as we could, our lungs burning, the voices fading into the depths. We breached the surface, gasping for air. Back on the boat, we sat in stunned silence. Daniel stared at the horizon, his face pale. The voices. They wanted us to join them, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I nodded, unable to shake the feeling of dread. The ocean holds many secrets, some better left undisturbed. As we sailed back to shore, the weight of our discovery pressed heavily on my mind. The voices from the abyss had spoken, and I knew I would never forget their haunting plea. I always thought the forest was my sanctuary. Every weekend, I'd escape to my cabin nestled deep within the woods, far from the prying eyes and incessant noise of the city. I considered myself at one with nature, but I was about to discover exactly how wrong I was. This is the story of how the forest turned on me. It started on an unusually warm autumn evening. The leaves, usually a vibrant mix of red, orange, and yellow, seemed dull, almost sickly. It must be an early sign of the season's end, I thought, unaware of the sinister changes taking root around me. After a long week in the city, I looked forward to the solace of my cabin. As I drove deeper into the forest, the winding roads seemed narrower, the trees closer. It felt as though the woods were closing in, a slight unease prickling the back of my neck. I chastised myself for being overly dramatic, attributing it to my overactive imagination. My cabin stood at the heart of this forest, a small wooden haven I built with my own hands. The moment I stepped out of my car, I felt it, a heavy, oppressive presence that seemed to weigh down the very air around me. The usual chatter of birds and rustling of leaves was absent. The forest was silent, too silent. I unlocked the cabin door and stepped inside, the familiar scent of pine wood and old books welcoming me, but I immediately noticed something felt off. The air inside the cabin was stale, almost hostile. I decided to open up the cabin windows and then take a walk, hoping the fresh air would clear my mind. As I ventured deeper into the forest, I noticed more changes. The trees, once vibrant and full of life, now appeared twisted and gnarled. Their branches reached out like skeletal hands, their canopies a blanket of decay suffocating the life underneath it. The ground was covered in a thick, unnatural fog which only heightened the eerie silence of the forest. And then suddenly I saw it, a figure, barely visible through the mist. It stood at the edge of a clearing, watching me. My heart pounded as I called out, but the figure didn't respond. Instead, it seemed to dissolve into the fog. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it as a trick of the light, but a sense of fear settled over me. I hurried back to the cabin, the forest seeming to close in around me with every step. Once inside, I locked the door and drew the curtains, trying to shut out the creeping unease. But the feeling of being watched remained. I couldn't shake the image of that figure from my mind. That night, I awoke to the sound of scratching at my window. My heart raced as I sat up, listening. The sound grew louder, more insistent. I forced myself to move, creeping toward the window. As I pulled back the curtain, I saw them. Branches, long and twisted, scraping against the glass as if trying to get in. I stumbled back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. This wasn't possible. Trees didn't move like that. I tried to rationalize it, but deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. The forest was alive and it was angry. The next morning, I decided to leave. As I packed my things, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The scratching at the window continued, now accompanied by a low, mournful wail that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the cabin. I stepped outside, my breath catching in my throat. The forest had changed overnight. The trees loomed closer, their branches intertwining to form a nearly impenetrable barrier. The path to my car was overgrown, the fog thicker than ever. I pushed through the undergrowth, branches clawing at my clothes and skin. The forest seemed to fight me, every single step a battle. As I neared my car, I felt a sharp pain in my leg. Looking down, I saw a vine, thick and thorny, wrapped around my ankle, tightening like a noose. I cried out, trying to free myself, but the vine only tightened its grip. The forest was alive, and its intent was clear. It wanted me. Desperation fueled my struggle as I hacked at the vine with my pocket knife. The vine recoiled, but not before leaving deep, bloody gashes on my leg. Limping and gasping for breath, I finally reached my car. As I fumbled with the keys, the trees closed in, their branches forming a cage around me. I started the car and slammed on the accelerator, the tires spinning in the mud. I drove as fast as I could, the forest alive around me. Branches lashed out at the car, shattering windows and leaving deep gouges in the paint. The fog thickened, making it nearly impossible to see. I was trapped in a living nightmare. Suddenly, a massive tree crashed down in front of me, blocking the road. I swerved, the car skidding off the path and into a ditch. Pain shot through my body as the impact jolted me, but I couldn't stop now. I had to get away. I stumbled out of the car, the forest, now a twisted, malevolent entity. Vines and branches reached for me, tearing at my clothes and skin. I ran, adrenaline fueling my desperate flight, but the forest was relentless. I tripped over a root and fell hard. The wind knocked out of me. Before I could get up, the vines were upon me, wrapping around my limbs and dragging me back. I screamed, but no one could hear me. The forest had swallowed me whole. I fought with everything I had, but the vines were too strong. They pulled me deeper into the forest, the darkness closing in. My vision blurred, the world fading away. The last thing I saw was the twisted, gnarled trunk of a tree closing in on me, its essence cold and unfeeling. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but when I woke, I was back in my cabin, my body covered in scratches and bruises. The forest was silent, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. I was a prisoner, trapped in a living nightmare. Days turned into weeks, and the forest never let up. Every time I tried to leave, it fought me, driving me back with its malevolent force. I was trapped, a prisoner in my own sanctuary. The forest was alive, and it had claimed me as its own. Now, as I sit here writing this, I can hear the scratching at the window. The forest is waiting, watching. It won't let me go, and one day it will take me for good. So if you find yourself deep in the woods, remember this: Mother Nature is not always kind, and sometimes she fights back.